Hi everybody, welcome to my session, Parents as Partners, talking about enhancing the homeschool communication with technology. My name is Nikki Bradenberg and I'm the Director of Education at Montana PBS. I serve as a digital learning specialist for teachers all over Montana, specifically in rural schools. I've been in this role for just about 4 years now, and I've had the privilege of working with schools all over Montana, including Three Forks, Livingston, Manhattan, Billings, and beyond. I'm really excited to talk to you today. I've created this session after the 2020 spring shelter-in-place school closures at the request of some principals who wanted to have some discussions with their staff about the tools and the strategies they used to communicate with families during the pandemic. I came into this role with a background of an elementary school teacher. I taught for 16 years, mostly in the K-1 area, but also 4th and 5th grade as well. During that time, I learned a lot about parent communication. I will admit that it was something that I struggled to do in the early part of my career, and it truly was after I had kids of my own that I saw the value of strong connections between home and school. So this session, we're going to talk about what tools, specifically digital tools, are available. I will invite you to reflect on the things that you're already doing and how it's going. We'll do some compare and contrast with the tools that are out there. I won't tell you which tools to use. I will simply give you some information and let you decide which tools work the best for your students and your community. I'll talk you through how to set up a communication plan so that you can streamline and make communication more efficient, so you don't feel like your only job is communicating with families. And then we'll talk a little bit, hopefully, about what we're doing to support families to use the digital tools that their kids need to learn right now. And how are we providing strong, ongoing support for the parents. The school year, by the time this video has aired, the school year has already begun. And parents you're probably already communicating with parents and working with them to use digital tools at home. And so we'll talk about what you can do to continue the support of that use. So I like to start with a little bit of brevity. This is a video that aired last spring on the morning show on Sunday morning, featuring Jim Gaffigan and his 5 kids. So we'll just take a peek at this and get an idea of what remote learning looks like in the home from the parent's perspective.
4 weeks into family quarantine, and Jim Gaffigan is still learning the ropes.
Hi, I'm Jim Gaffigan, and I used to do stand-up comedy. I used to write, and I also did some acting. But now, I'm a professional shut-in, living with my wife and 5 children in our New York City apartment. The daily ritual of cooking for and cleaning up after 5 children seems cruel. Well, it seemed cruel until they started their distance learning program. Distance learning. How do I say this without cursing?
I'm going to remind you, I've made comments on a lot of your work. Go back and check.
If you've never heard of distance learning, that means you probably don't have children, or you're a worse parent than I am.
You can also say cheating in 2 sentences, right? Like watching.
For students, they get to go to school, but don't get to be with their friends. For teachers, they get to teach, but only to a screen.
Just write a message to me and I will get back to you.
And for parents, we get to fail at tech support and class monitor.
I can't hear anyone. I can't hear anyone. I can't hear anyone.
All right, that's all right. We have 5 children on 5 different devices in 5 different parts of my New York City apartment, with 5 different schedules that happen simultaneously. Sounds fun, right? Well, it sure is. My wife has created elaborate color-coded schedules and charts to manage when online classes end and others begin. There's usually some drama with every change. The great irony of distance learning is that it occurs on screens.
Make sure that middle finger's all the way up.
Screens the great enemy of parents. Parents are always trying to get the screens away from their children. But during quarantine and during distance learning, you give them the screens. And then you take them, and then you give them, and then you take them. It's fun. It's fun. If you don't know what it's like to take a screen from a child, just imagine you're trying to convince an addict to go to rehab. What are you doing?
Nothing, I was just looking at it.
It's not time. My wife and I just finally caved and bought a steel charging contraption that locks away the screens. Now that may seem extreme, but we've only had to change the combination twice this week. I guess the point I'm saying here on Easter is we're having fun. Be safe, everyone.
So that video was filmed obviously last spring in Easter during the height of distance learning, shelter in place. It was a little too true to be funny for me as a parent in places, but I think it helped me think about all of the parents and how they're supporting kids to learn at home and all their different environments. And we could be funny about it, but it's so true. It is funny. So when I began this session, I didn't just watch Jim Gaffigan videos. I also, when I wanted to plan for this, I really wanted to understand how, or the challenges that parents faced last spring when we were sort of forced into remote learning. It wasn't really a choice. And so I conducted several interviews with families, with teachers who were also parents. And I collected the information on sticky notes and then kind of spread the sticky notes out to look at some of the common themes that I heard in all the interviews. And I just asked very open-ended questions. Tell me about distance learning. What worked, what didn't work. And I tried really hard to go at it from, I was very clear that I'm trying to create a session for schools that will help them streamline their digital communication and how they just interact with families, and anything you share with me will help me to create this session, as I didn't want it to be just a gripe session. But the three themes that emerged from those interviews were communication, feedback, and consistency. Most of the teachers were not sure about who they should be hearing from and what they should expect from this teacher and what they should expect from that teacher. It was hard to keep track, especially in middle schools and high schools when students had multiple teachers. Feedback was another thing, that students submitted work, but then they didn't hear how they did, or they weren't getting even a acknowledgement from teachers that the work had been submitted. And then some teachers were really, really quick to get it to students. And so again, not really knowing how to respond and how to make a plan and how to keep kids motivated if they weren't getting feedback. And then this thing of consistency, it was challenging. We needed a routine, we needed a schedule. We didn't know what was happening from one moment to the next. Now, all of these interviews, these people were very understanding of the fact that this was an emergency situation and schools did the best they could. But I think they all felt like it shined the light on holes in the communication plans at the school. And I even had principals, tell me that they realized, just how many families they didn't have contact information for. And so all of this gave us a lot of problems, what felt like challenges and problems. And I created this session to really help us work through some of those challenges, thinking back how we can improve communication, give better feedback, and be more consistent about our messaging. So I took through, when I talk to teachers and I reflect back on my own time in the classroom, and I look at all of the different types of communication and all the different ways we can reach out to parents and guardians and caregivers. These are the categories that present. We've got email, social media, newsletters, texting platforms. A lot of teachers were using those this last spring. Class websites, portfolios and blogs, and then the learning management systems that we were using to post work. And some teachers I talked to were just using all of these things. They were trying to just get the message out there. to as many people as possible. And this was taking up most of their time. You can see I've listed some of the tools that you can use for these particular types of communication. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just mostly what I'm seeing people use. I think that these texting platforms have really become very popular because smartphones are a very common device. A lot of families have them. And most of these platforms allow teachers to do things from their computer under their account without giving out personal information. But the message goes to a smartphone where the parents they always have that device with them. They've been trained to look for those things for work and their social lives. And so having messages from school there makes sense for a lot of families. That being said, class websites are still being used. Portfolios and blogs are still a great way for students to communicate with families about their progress. However, if you look at this list and you think about the job of communicating with families, if you do all of these things, you're being redundant in some places. There may be some things that parents are not responding or not looking at you. You know, I did a newsletter early on in my teaching career. I put a lot of work and time into it, and printed it, put it in, handed it out on a Friday and sent it home, and walked into the hall and saw the hallway just littered with those newsletters that just never made it out the door. And I tried to get better. You know, I put it in folders, made sure it got in backpacks, and then would go through the backpacks the following week and see the newsletters still like in a wad at the bottom of the backpack. And so it wasn't long before the newsletter for me was abandoned because it was something that I wasn't achieving my objective. No one was reading it. I do know teachers that have had luck with a digital newsletter and sharing it digitally. And that's where I've really liked some more. When I switched over to a some more newsletter, I could actually see who was reading it because it gave me some analytics, and I really liked that. I could quickly drop that link in an email. So see, I combined that newsletter piece with email, and I saw a little bit more engagement with that newsletter. Quickly though, I moved from newsletter to website, and I had a Google site for my class, and I used the Google site mostly to give that sort of general information about what we were learning and the calendar and things that were coming up. It wasn't very personal, but it was just a way to share things. So those are some of the tools, and we'll talk a little bit more about each of those individual tools and their purpose so that you can kind of think about which one you would rather use. But I wanted to think about first, when we look at the general categories for those tools, what is the purpose? What kind of messages do we send with that tool? And so I took each of the categories, email, social media, newsletters, and I listed the types of messages we might send using that type of tool. And this really helped me see that if we were using all of these, and I think a lot of teachers in schools are, we are repeating, we are sending some of the same things across multiple places. And it could be possible that we wouldn't have to do all of these things, that we could just pick a couple of things that would allow us to send announcements and do recognition and share learning goals as well, and then find another tool that allows us to do some parent-teacher one-on-one. I don't think we can get away from email. I think that's a necessary evil, and it really is the most direct way to write to families and to send a message out. I think people are very much in the habit of checking their email, and we need it for internal communication as well as for parent-teacher one-to-one. But do we need to use it for announcements, recognition, reminders, if we're also using a texting platform? So this is where I really encourage participants to kind of think about, how could I streamline so I'm only using, 3 things to communicate with families? And when I look at the things that I need to do, of course, I need to have one-to-one contact with parents. Of course, I need to make announcements and recognize students. And I need to share learning goals and the work that's happening in the classroom, as well as resources. Could I choose a few tools that can do those things without having, and then abandon some other things? Could I abandon my class website because I'm using a blog platform that allows me to post information and share basically the same information that we had on our class website? So this is the point in a live session when I would ask you to, in the chat box, tell me, how many of these things are you doing? Are you doing like all of them, or is it just a couple of them? And tell me what your goal is. How many types of communication would you like to make streamlined down to? I will say something about social media. I feel like social media does have a place in sharing about the schools, and I've seen some schools use social media to their advantage as a way to connect with families outside in the community, especially in rural areas where the Wi-Fi is spotty. But we can, for some reason, get a cell signal on a smartphone, which would allow us to see something that came to Facebook. And so I think using social media for announcements, recognition, reminders, resources really does have a place. I think that most families are okay with the use of social media for this purpose. I think it's when we get into student work samples and things happening specifically in the classroom, photos of children, that's when it becomes sticky. So we do have to be careful about the social media use. But I think especially during school, when we're in this time where we don't know if schools will close and we need to keep everybody up to date, social media really does have a place for getting information out there quickly. I think it's just important that everyone's on the same page for how those platforms can and should be used. So of course, the best tools are the ones that you and families will use. And the trick to all of this is figuring out the combination of tools. We can't just use one, unfortunately. Figuring out the combination of tools that will meet the majority of our families. The truth is, there are some families we just may not be able to reach. They just don't want or can't be connected to the school for more than that, minimum contact. And I think we have to make peace with that and work on the majority as best we can. So now let's use the group chat, the chat area, and tell me what tools you're using already. So if you're using Bloomz, if you're using Remind, if you're using Seesaw, just go ahead and list them all in there. Now, if this were a live session, you would be in this slide deck, and I would invite you to write the tools into this box and drag stars into the boxes as people fill this area with digital tools, and we'd get kind of a good idea of what everybody's being used, or what's being used in every setting based on who's in this session. But we can't do that in this pre-recorded video, so let's use the chat feature and share those tools. So when I did this session this summer, and I did this virtually a couple of times, and we created a Padlet wall, and I asked for teachers in the sessions to give me the pros and cons of the digital tools that they had been using. And so since that's not something we can do in a pre-recorded session, I thought it would be useful to just show you that Padlet wall. And in the slides that I've linked and given you in the chat box there, you can see and open this for yourself. But I just listed tools going across the top here: Remind, Dojo, Bloomz, Seesaw, newsletters, Google Voice, and asked teachers from the session that I did this in, I think it was the Mountain Moot session. I think that's what this was, like that Carroll College was putting on. All of the different pros and cons of these particular platforms. And this, teachers, the feedback I've had is that this is really helpful to kind of see how teachers feel about the different ones, and to see some of the challenges teachers have had and the things teachers have said about these tools. Now, you'll notice that across most platforms, you'll see tools like parents don't download the app or check it. And that's one of those things we can't control, right? We can set it up, we can teach people how to use it, we can really encourage the use, but they have to meet us halfway. And so that's not necessarily the tool's fault or your fault, but I think that's a challenge that we have for any technology tool. You'll see there are quite a few comments about Seesaw, because that's being widely used across the state for multiple purposes, and parent communication is just one of the things we can do with a tool like Seesaw. And then Google Voice is something that teachers have told me about. They are setting up a phone number with Google Voice that parents can directly call and text, and that way we have the advantages of calling and texting without giving away our personal information. They really love with the Google Voice that you can set up certain windows in the day that they can reach you, and then days when you're not available, and then an automatic message is generated reminding families that you're not going to be taking calls right now. This isn't the window for taking calls. So this is an alternative to giving families your personal phone numbers, and can work through your computer or on your smartphone, however you want to use it. And it has some interesting features as far as languages or transcribing messages and things like that. So something to consider if you want to make that kind of a communication available. So that's the Padlet, and I encourage you to look through that, and feel free to add your own pros and cons. If you have used any of these particular tools, or you would like to add a shelf for tools that you have used and you'd like to discuss the pros and cons, I invite you to contribute and add to this Padlet. You can also use this little heart. You'll notice at the end of some things, you can press the heart and give that and acknowledge that idea is something that you agree with or appreciate. So this is probably something that, I mean, at the viewing of this video, you're into October and you've probably done this already. So this is a reminder of ways to make parents and caregivers part of the communication plan, which is to ask them what their preferences are. How do they best like to be contacted? It doesn't mean you have to only contact them that way, but there are certainly tools and strategies out there that allow you to get everybody's information, give everybody mostly what their preferences are. Asking about social media comfort, I think, is an important one. Are they excited about having posts from your classroom on social media, or would they not welcome that? Would that feel like icky to them? Asking about what kind of communication do they want to hear from the school? Do they want all the communication, or do they just want the important stuff? I think certain levels of communication, some parents trust the schools and don't need to know everything that's happening, and would prefer not to be inundated with information from the school. So if we can figure that out, that helps us create a strategy. And then obviously, while you want to start the year asking parents these questions, I also think it's important to start every quarter or trimester with a check-in to ask these questions. What do I need to know about your child? What has changed? How are things going? What do you hear at home about school that would help me in working with your child? Opening up for that kind of feedback from families. I think it's really important to building strong communication between families and teachers. So then the other piece that we have to do is, once we choose the tools that we want to use to communicate, and we've decided these are the tools we're going to use, and then we let parents know we're going to be using Seesaw for this, we're going to be using Bloomz for this, and you can expect emails about this. But then you need to show them how to use all of those tools. We can assume they know how to use email for the most part, but if it's a tool like Bloomz or Seesaw, providing that initial orientation for how to use the tool is important, and then providing ongoing support so that they can continue to use it successfully could also be in the way of giving them some kind of troubleshooting document that allows them to problem solve on their own. At this point, I'd love if you would use the chat to share how your school did this at the start of the year and how you're currently providing this ongoing support. So how did you get parents on board with technology and digital tools? And then what are you doing to support them? So go ahead and put that in the chat box and we'll read through that and have some discussion with one another. So I do know a lot of schools began the year with a virtual open house or a virtual onboarding session for teachers, for families. Some schools had in-person onboarding sessions where the families came and they got them their passwords and had them bring their device and learn how to log in right there while they had the teacher support. And from what I heard, those were very successful for those parents that chose to participate and could participate. I know some districts had set up a specific email address that went right to IT if parents were experiencing technology issues, and IT could work with them and help them with things. I know teachers that created documents with links to websites that they could be using and the login information that they would need, and directed parents to go find those. I know a lot of teachers created tutorials and screencasts about how to use Google Classroom and Seesaw and Bloomz and Remind and all of those tools, so that parents would have the resources they needed, and as well as to go and find the answers to their questions without having to just call the school. So now the next piece of this is to really think about your communication plan. Now the goal is to use as few tools as possible to make things more efficient for you, and to really help parents have a smaller number of things that they need to check, and to be very clear about both when families can expect communication and how and what type. So when you think about all of the things you need to tell families on a regular basis, one-to-one parent-teacher communication, announcements, reminders, recognition, learning goals and content, student work samples, and then daily assignments and resources. Is there a tool that could cover more than one category for this? Which ones could you use? So Seesaw is a great example that fits and really does cover all of these things. And if you're using Seesaw already, looking at your family connection piece and going into your settings to make sure that you're utilizing Seesaw for all of its benefits would be worth doing if you're not already doing all of this. And the other thing, so the way I set this up, and I'll show you in the notes section, I've created a printable version of this communication plan that just looks like this. If you want to drag a text box down and put it over top of that, and it allows you to print that out if you want and write on that. But you can also just open up a Word document and just start listing what they are. It doesn't have to be fancy or cutesy like this. But take a moment to think about one-to-one parent-teacher communication and then just list the tool or strategy you're going to use for that. Obviously, email is going to be there. Phone calls will probably still be there because we still need to make phone calls and talk to people. Face-to-face interactions to the best with social distancing and in healthy ways will still be there. But adding that there, announcements, reminders, recognition. What if we could just say, all announcements, reminders, and recognition will take place on our class website. And so if you want to see that information, you need to go to the class website. I can use my email to drive traffic to that place by adding the link to that class website to my email signature line, so that every time someone gets an email from me, they already have that link. Every time I update the class website, I send all parents an email letting them know the website's been updated and they need to check it for valuable information. And now I'm not wondering who's looking at it. Learning goals and content covered can also be on that class website if I want to. Student work samples probably can live there, but if I'm using a portfolio tool like a blog, that might be the best place for that. Or a learning management system like Seesaw or Canvas or Google Classroom. That's often where those kinds of things can live, and that's obviously where our assignments and resources will be. So if you're using Google Classroom or Seesaw, you've naturally got things in place for that. So here's my final thoughts about family communication digitally and in person. The relationships are what make a strong family communication plan. So taking the time to make some phone calls, to send those one-to-one messages, to balance out your positive comments with your frustrated comments, to really send home those inventories and surveys and then read them and reread them, acknowledge the work that parents are putting into their kids, and really acknowledging to family members that they are the expert on their children and you value their expertise, goes a long way in having strong communication. I think if parents trust us as educators and trust that we believe in them and we want them to do the best that they can, they're more likely to read our messages and respond to them. Good communication plans take time. So even the greatest plan won't feel like it's a good plan or like it's working for a while, because it just takes a while to get everybody in the habit of checking those tools and responding to things. And if it's not working, you can alter it, you can change it. You know, if you got Remind set up and you're using it, but you're not getting response and parents are choosing to email you instead, maybe Remind is something to put to the side and we'll just go back to sending emails and find ways to make email communication more efficient. I think boundaries are really, really important when it comes to communicating with families, finding that nice balance of being available, but also being unavailable so that you can go home to your own household and take care of your own needs and your own family, and making it really clear when you're available and when you're not available, how you can be contacted and how you can't be contacted, and letting people know where those boundaries are and then sticking to them so that you can be consistent. And I think the most important thing that I hope comes out of this is that, yes, we want to be consistent. We want to try really hard that if we're updating the website, we're doing it close to the same day every day, and we're letting people know that it's been updated, and we're using a blog with students, we're updating that blog and having the students share their work on a consistent basis. But the truth is, life happens, and we shouldn't expect ourselves to be perfect. It's fine if we accidentally forget to not send home the reminder email. It's not required. It's okay to make mistakes. Own them, admit to them. I'm only human. I'm doing the best I can. I'll do better next time is the best thing that we can do when it comes to communicating with families. So that's my session today. I hope it was useful. I hope it gave you some things to think about. Obviously, you can go back through the slides and link on all the tools and dig into those for yourself and find the set of tools that works the best for you. Remember that to work toward efficiency and to not be afraid to make mistakes, and to, when you can, try and use fewer tools that do more of the communication tasks. If you have questions or anything that I can help you with, this is all of my contact information. I'm more than happy to help you talk through and problem solve as you're working on improving digital communication. These are all the ways you can contact me. Our Montana PBS Education website, on Twitter. We also have a closed Facebook group for teachers, and we'd love to have you join our group. So you can just click that link and ask to be added and answer our security questions, and we'll let you right in. And then, of course, don't feel free to email me and let me know if I can help you with anything. So thanks for your time today, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference.